What is up, aimers? This RTN season I got top 4 at my local RTN with Riptide on the Barbed Castaway, so it was an aim list. I've been wanting to do a deck tech for Barbed Castaway in CC for a while now, and this seemed like a good excuse. I made it all the way to top 4, only to once again be blasted out of contention by a-IO. So in this video, I'll go through the deck, explain equipment choices, arrow choices, buff choices, trap choices, and then I'll do a quick tournament report at the end as well. And if you'd like to see some more Riptide content or random flesh and blood deck techs, then feel free to subscribe. And with that, I shall start the deck tech for you. I'll begin by laying out all this equipment nicely, and then I'll talk about it as well, don't worry. So, we do have Barbed Castaway. It's the only bow I run, don't run anything else. The deck is built around this thing. My only helmet is New Horizon. My only chest piece is Fendel Spring Tunic. My only arm piece is Long Draw Half Glove. I do have 2 boots. I run Perch Grapplers, and I also run the Null Rune boots. And then I've got 2 quivers as well. I have Quiver of Abyssal Depths and the Enchanted Quiver. I'm going to move these along here so it's a bit more symmetrical. Now I'll start by talking about Barbed Castaway. There's 2 effects, both of which are instants. You pay 1 to load, and you pay 1 to aim. The fact that they're instant means that you can do a lot of cool shenanigans. You're very strong going second because you can filter your hand, and you can also set up a 5-card hand as well. You can also dodge hand disruption very easily, so Culls, Succumb to Temptation, Bonds of Agony, anything that Assassin wants to do, you can just kind of commit a little bit of block to it, and then if they do go over the top and they do call your bluff, then you can just load and say, okay, I just took a bit of damage, but I still have a turn. The most important thing about this bow is that it lets you give aim counters. Riptide has got 2 good aim counter arrows that give Dominate, and it's the entire reason why this deck is functionable. Don't know if that's the word, but you know what I mean. Next we've got the New Horizons. This pairs very well with Barbed Castaway because it says, once per turn instant, you pay 1 to flip an arrow face up and give an aim counter. New Horizons says, if you have a face up card in your arsenal, then you get an extra arsenal zone. So they work very well together. I don't think you can play any other headpiece in Barbed Castaway unless you're on a budget. So New Horizons allows for some really nice play patterns. If you ever have like floating resources left over with, say, an Endless Arrow, if it hits, bounces back to hand, you just pay, load the Endless Arrow, and then maybe arsenal another card as well. Super nice play patterns that you can do. The one chest piece I'm running is Tunic. I tried Barbed Castaway I tried Trench of Sunken Treasure for a long time in this list, and it's fine, but it is really, really, really bad when you pitch an entire card away to give an aim counter. That just sucks. So I'm playing for Tunic in this matchup because every 3 turns I can give an aim counter for free, and I want to do that with my Stone Rain. It's okay pitching to give an aim counter if you're playing, say, a Deadeye or a Line It Up, and you're pitching a blue, because then you got floating resources, but the Tunic just smooths over so many turns. If you've got a Murky Water in your arsenal, you don't have any blues in hand, you can just use the Tunic counter and then pay with the yellow to send it. It's just so good. I don't think the deck functions without it. We have Long Draw as well. Because we're not in Trench, we might sometimes end up with a trap in arsenal that we don't want. Or if we just don't have any buffs and we don't push damage, Long Draw fixes that. It lets you play around Warmongers as well. Gives you a little bit of extra armor block, and it is really good into Azalea because it means Red and Ledger basically doesn't exist because your bow's an instant, this is an instant, so you can still set off a really big arrow even under something like Red and Ledger. Long Drive Say is vital because it's a card that raises the floor of the deck considerably. This is a deck that needs to see, ideally, an arrow and some buffs in the same hand, and that's just not going to happen all the time, and Long Draw mitigates one side of that. Very quickly as well, New Horizon actually mitigates the other part of seeing no arrows, because if you have a hand where you've got 2 arrows, right, what I like to do is I'll send 1 and keep the other for the other turn, even if it means I take an extra 3 damage, because if in the following turn I have more arrows, then I can just use those arrows to block instead, and if I don't have any arrows, then I don't need to block, because I've got my 1 arrow, I've got my buffs or traps, and I'm good. So it's a way of increasing consistency. The Perch Grapplers are in here because it's just the life is all that matters really, the 2 block. The effect does occasionally come up. I have done a triple Dominate turn with Perch Grapplers before, but it's very, very rare. I just want to quickly talk about the Azalea army deck pieces as well. So what you could play in these slots are the Sharpshooters and the Flight Path. Out of the two, Flight Path is a lot better. It lets you go wider. I just found that I didn't really get much value from going wider. What this deck really wants to do is go tall. It wants to buff, 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 and send a really annoying arrow at your opponent. You don't really want to split up the damage in this deck. So that's why I elected for the Perch Grapplers, and I found out that I just want a bit more space to find my Dominate arrows, and that one extra life can make the difference. Sharpshooters, I don't think is very good in this deck because it makes you more vulnerable to Warmongers, and if you are having to use your Sharpshooters, it means you've not seen any buffs, which means it's only good with Murky Water. And I'd rather just take a setup turn to do that than, you know, fire it straight away. And also because we're not on Trench, we can't clear the arsenal. You shouldn't get trap locked. I've never once been trap locked, but it could happen, who knows. And for Arcane Barrier, I'm on Null Rune Boots. No Trench at all because, again, the extra resource, even in the Arcane matchups, is super important. It's even more so important because Rune Blades are quite hard to beat for Riptide, and so you need every advantage you can get, and one free resource every 3 turns can give you a functional turn when you need it. The Null Rune Boots come in for Aurora, Vincent, and obviously Wizard. Now that Viscerai's gone, I don't have to worry about him. That hero is basically not a loss for this deck, so it's another reason to play this version of the deck again. I have 2 quivers in this list. I've got the Quiver of Abyssal Depths and the new shiny Enchanted Quiver. Abyssal Depths is the main one I use. This is in here for any hero that's not going to be presenting arcane damage towards me. This just ensures that I can't be fatigued, because if we've got our 3 Stone Rain, or 3 Murky Water, or 3 Codex, and the Quiver, that's access to 11 Dominate arrows throughout a game, which is very, very handy, and it means you can present a lot of damage. So very handy for that. Usually doesn't get used, but it's there as a backup. There's no other good quiver to replace it, basically. And then the Enchanted Quiver is just 2 extra life against anyone that deals arcane damage, which is super handy. The one time I'd say that is not being used for extra 2 life is against Aurora. I will just use this to stop a ping from a Sigil of Suffering when they have Channel Lightning Valley up. So it means that I can play my turn and not have to worry about keeping 1 floating to pay for AB in case they have it, because I've got the Quiver. The Quiver also pairs really nicely with Barbed Castaway. Out of all the Ranger decks, Barbed Castaway is probably one that uses this the most, because you can at instant speed flip the arrow face up and then make the Enchanted Quiver effect live, which is relevant into Kano mostly. It can also be relevant into Verdance as well. Onto the arrows next. We'll go through the main win conditions of the deck, and that is your 3 copies of Murky Water and your 3 copies of Stone Rain. These are the only reason that this deck is any way viable, because the problem with this deck is, yes, you can go tall, but at the end of the day, none of it is dominated, overpowered. You're not going particularly wide to kind of get around blocks that way, so your opponent can really pick and choose when to take damage if you don't have access to these arrows, which is why you need them. For the rest of the red arrows, I'm playing 3 Drill Shot, 3 Endless Arrow. These are just your best 0 cost reds. We've got 3 Immobilizing Shot, 3 Sleep Dart, 3 Remorseless, 3 Heat Seeker, and last but certainly not least, we have 3 copies of Battering Bolt, which is just fitting down at the bottom here. So I kind of class these arrows as anything that's not Stone Rain or Murky Water. I view it as either a tempo arrow or a value arrow. So for example, Drill Shot and Endless Arrow are in most cases just your value arrows, right? Because it's not often that, say you're against an aggro deck, they're probably not going to block those things, so you're getting really good value out of them. However, arrows like Immobilizing Shot, Sleep Dart, Remorseless, and Battering Bolt, when you're putting them in for matchups that are relevant, which it should be, then they're tempo arrows, because your opponent has to respect them and give you something in response, or you've got an insane value from those arrows. When you get that tempo, you need to be using it to send these big guys, because it stops your opponent from just blocking out again, right? And then we've got Heat Seeker as well. This card is insane. Like, it's just so good. You go Premeditate Heat Seeker with Tunic Trigger. Like, you can make use of the Premeditate Ponder, and you can make use of the Heat Seeker effect. It's just so much value. So I have one thing I like to say with Heat Seeker is that against a bad player, it's a value play, and against a good player, it's a tempo play, because a good player will block that out, and they'll be like, no, that can't hit, because that's obscene value. So this kind of toes the line between them all. But yeah, basically these arrows are all in here to try and buy us a bit of space so that we can hit with Stone Rain and with Murky Water. It also, because these two exist, it forces our opponent to either commit to blocking us out, in which case we've got all the time in the world to set up these big guys, or they need to play they need to trade with us. So it means that these arrows will actually hit throughout the game, and that these two are kind of just there to really force through some nasty on hits and some damage and just very good value. So I'll just quickly as well just talk about a few things regarding the arrows. Drill Shot is very good with Barbed Castaway because, again, you can give it an aim counter to give it piercing, which makes it very difficult for your opponent to block it out. Endless Arrow gives you some nice play patterns with Barbed Castaway because if it hits, it bounces back to hand, and you've got floating resources and a ponder. You just pay to load the Endless Arrow, you get your ponder, you're not IPing yourself. Gives you some very nice play patterns. Immobilizing Shot, I put this in for Aurora, Syndra, and Dash.io. I don't like it into Dash.io after testing, and I didn't play a single Aurora or a single Syndra on the day, so I don't know if it's any good. I don't know if I like this, I'll see, because it conflicts with Stone Rain in that you don't want to be pitching a card to give either of these an aim counter, you want to be using the Tunic, because pitching a whole card to give an aim counter sucks. It's really below rate, especially on a Immobilizing Shot because it doesn't have the evasion, no dominates, your opponent really has a lot of agency in how they deal with it. So I probably would cut this, but I'll test it out a bit more because into someone like Syndra, it's there for the tempo, right? It forces them to respect it, and then it gives you space to play out your bigger hands. The Sleep Dart just depends who's here. Maybe because Viscerize left the format, it's less important now, and with Zen nearly leaving, I could see this going. If Zen goes, I probably would cut Sleep Dart. Remorseless is just insane value into the aggro decks, also helps into decks that want to pack a lot of D-reacts because you can just load it face up and fire it. And then Battering Bolt, if the on-hit is relevant, you play it. It's also a popper, so very good card. And lastly, for my attack actions, I have 3 copies of Intoxicating Shot, and I also have 3 copies of Blue Drill Shot. And I'll also chuck in Codex here as well because it's basically an arrow. And if it's not, it's nothing. So Intoxicating Shot, very, very good value. You need quite a decent amount of resources in this deck. Tunic allows you to get away with running yellows, but ideally I found that 6 blues from arrows is quite good, and I like my blues to be arrows because it means if I have buff, trap, and blue arrow, I still have a turn, which is why I think it's important that they're arrows. I think it's important that they're also 0 costs because paying to shoot a blue arrow sucks. It's terrible rate. So you're either committed to blocking out or you're taking damage to send a below rate attack back at them, which is terrible because if your hand again is like buff, trap, blue arrow, and say it's an infecting shot, what are you doing with that hand? Like you're gonna block 9 and arsenal the buff? It's just not that good. So if it's a blue drill shot instead, I can go premeditate blue drill shot. That's a 2-card 5 with 2 very good on hits, which you probably should respect as someone playing against the deck because we want our dominates to get through, and so removing our opponent's armor is a very, very important step to making sure that we can get that damage to hit. So yeah, this card was very good. It's just, even sending it for 2 on the day, I had some opponents just giving armor for it, and that's fine for my blue because it means that my later turns that are actually good are a lot more effective. So I really like it. An Intoxicating Shot is a 0 for 4 blue if your opponent blocks. So what I try and do is pair this with some really nasty on hits, like I try to give a Deadeye to it, or like a Seek and Destroy with a Premeditate, and you pitch it so when it comes back up in second cycle, it's a lot more risky for your opponent to take that hit because they're triggering all your traps and they're probably low on life. So yeah, very good card. Against most decks, they don't block it as a 0 for 3 because the vast majority of decks these days either have Go Again already or can't make use of the Go Again. So really the courage is the only one that matters. And of course I must talk about our good expensive friend Codex of Frailty, who is definitely about to get a reprint, or hopefully does. This is very good with Barbed Castaway because with any excess cards you have in hand, you can just pay instant speed to load an arrow and then you're not losing anything. So very good card, and again, into more fatiguey matchups, I'm trying to get my Dominate arrows back with these because it just stops me from getting fatigued. But you can get anything you like, really. It depends on the matchup. Onto the buffs now. We have 3 copies of Release the Tension, 3 copies of Lace with Bloodrot, 3 copies of Seek and Destroy, and 3 copies of Premeditate. That makes up the red 0 cost buffs, and for the yellow 1 cost buffs, I'm playing 3 Line It Up and 3 Deadeye. Now when it comes to the red buffs, these 3 here are, in my opinion, the best. You've got Premeditate, which is obscene value. Seek and Destroy, when paired with a Dominate arrow, means that your opponent maybe can't use their full hand. If you pair it with Stone Rain, it means that card that Stone Rain banishes never sees the light of day again. And Lace of Blood Rot's just a 0 for 5. With Viscera going, and therefore there being less Deadwood Dirge in the format, giving Blood Rots is a very good thing again. And even against Vincent, your plan is usually to fatigue them out, so you don't slide this in anyway, it doesn't matter. Release the Tension is super good in this deck because we're a deck that likes to dominate, and so pairing Dominate Arrows with Release the Tension into slower decks like Verdance, Florian for example, means that our Dominate Arrows go through, and this paired with Seek and Destroy is a very effective combo. Hell, even like Stone Rain, Seek and Destroy followed up by a Dominate is very good. So like these enable the Dominate to be a lot more effective, and you do need that because there will be people who go, alright, I'm going to block you out, show me what you can do, and these cards are what you use to show them that they're going to die. In Barbed Castaway, I think Release the Tension makes sense because you're also only sending about one arrow. You're never sending more than one arrow a turn, right? So the effect on this is actually relevant, whereas I don't like it in the aggro versions of Riptide because you're sending like 2 or 3 arrows a turn, so who cares if you got Release the Tension on one of them? They'll just use the direct on another one. So Release Tension, I think, is a must play, especially for moving into a slower format with Viscera going, or if you've just got a lot of slower decks that are in your meta. Again, it feels super amazing when you go Release the Tension, Seek and Destroy, Stone Rain, Tunic, 10 Dominate, they go, ah crap, they banish a card face down, and then the end step you see they banish, with Seek and Destroy triggering, they get rid of whatever, and from their arsenal there's a D-React like a Carapace. It's a very good feeling, and it's very effective. On to the yellow buffs now. We've got the 3 lineup and the 3 Deadeye. These are kind of like your glue for the deck, they're your all-rounders, they do everything. They pitch, they block, and they buff, which is amazing, because you need that versatility in this sort of deck. Line it up, the effect in it is actually relevant. There are turns where you will want to give 2 end counters, just so you can set up for like another turn, for example. So I do very much like this as its effect. In terms of its effect, I very much like it. When I was checking my Talishar stats on Fabrary, I saw that it was a near perfect 33% split between playing this card, pitching with it, and blocking with it, which is perfect because that's exactly what this card should be doing. Deadeye is similar, but the on-hit effect for this is a lot more potent and a lot more devastating. I try it, like if you pair this with a Stone Rain, it's just, you're ripping 2 cards from their hand, they won't have a turn, you've got perfect hand information as well on how to block. It's super powerful. So this is another reason why you want to play Barbed Castaway Riptide, because you have access to this very powerful effect. But yeah, it can block 3 and it can pitch as well, so super strong. And again, even if you pair it with an arrow that doesn't have that good of an effect, like say an Intoxicating Shot, that's still something your opponent's going to have to block. So having this buff in hand turns all of your middling arrows into very good arrows that need to be respected. Now for the final bit, we have the traps. Of course, I have one of each legendary. Where are the other ones? I should have put these in order. But yeah, 1 Collapsing Trap, 1 Buzzsaw Trap, and 1 Spike Pit Trap. For the rest of the traps, I have 3 copies of Frailty Trap. That's not a trap. I've got 3 copies of Inertia Trap, 3 copies of Boulder Trap, 3 copies of Tar Pit Trap, and an honorary trap, Sink Below. These 3 are the reason you play Riptide. All super relevant. You can get obscene value from them. Spike Pit Trap at the tournament for me won me my game into Fang. It was a super close game, and the Spike Pit Trap actually milled the item that means that you can't play D-Reacts that turn, which would have been super relevant because the next time I drew 3 D-Reacts and it won me the game. So thank you very much, Spike Pit Trap, you won me a game, and obviously these 2 insane. Frailty Trap, I'm not so sure on. It's okay into Syndra, but they've really developed, the way they play doesn't really play into Frailty that much. I was mostly just playing it because it's a 4 to 5 value trap, which is pretty good. And I think in AIM Riptide you need a certain amount of trap damage to see you through in a lot of games. But if I was looking to make changes to the deck, I would consider cutting Frailty Trap for something else. Maybe even a Chain Reaction, just because it's a yellow. And the effect is somewhat relevant, because if you've got... One thing I have to admit is the yellow buffs are terrible arsenal targets, and Chain Reaction can sort of mitigate that. Inertia Trap has been insane for the deck. You need this because, like with the Release the Tension and the Seek and Destroy, it stops your opponent having an arsenal, which is very, very important for when you want to try to get your dominates through. And if you think about it, a lot of decks that want to block you out, like Florian, Verdance, Enigma, they all buff, so they all trigger the Inertia Trap, which means it pairs super well with your dominate arrows. Also is very good into Aurora, because she is always buffing, and keeping Aurora into 4-card hands when you're playing 6-card hands, very, very strong. So yeah, very good trap. The yellow traps, Boulder Trap and Tar Pit Trap, are amazing. Tar Pit Trap is like, it feels like a legendary trap, it's that good. Where your opponent goes, burn up shock, and they have like a Channel Lightning Valley up, and you like maybe pay for the burn up, and then they come at you with like, I don't know, E-Strike for 5, go again, and you Tar Pit, and you just like eat up both effects in one card. It's so much value. Stopping mass triggers as well. It just turns off a Syndra turn. This card is super good. Into Prism as well. It's just so relevant. And it's a yellow as well, so it's amazing. And the Boulder Trap, again, it pairs well with our strategy of trying to get those Dominate arrows to hit. The sooner you find Boulder Traps into your match in your games, the faster you can get those Dominate arrows to hit. The armor block is basically the only thing that basically makes the game unfavored for us. As soon as that armor is gone, it feels super favored for Riptide, because you're coming with breakpoints, 2 on-hits every turn. It's really good, and it's very hard for your opponent to deal with. So 3 Boulder Trap, I think, is very necessary. Again, it pairs well with your strategy and your game plan in Barbed Castaway Riptide specifically. Lastly, we've got 3 copies of Sink Below. It blocks 4, and I wanted to improve my Aurora matchup and my Syndra matchup. Spoiler, I didn't play against any of them well, actually it's not a spoiler, I told you earlier, but it's still a very good card because it's a hand fixer and it blocks 4. It's not necessary, you could cut it maybe for Shelter, but I actually think this is better than Shelter because I really want to just fix my hands if possible, dig for a buff, dig for an arrow. So yeah, I really like Sink Below. It's just a very good card, also good into Dash.io, but still wasn't enough to help me. Lastly, just to talk about the traps as well, I'm running here 15 traps, which means I'm able to get my Murky Water effect online as soon as possible, which means my Murky Water is obscene value. And you also want to be dealing as much damage from traps as possible, because again, you do only really have a limited amount of damage that you can force through. As in, I don't want to have to work too hard to get my dominates through. I don't want to have to fight against fatigue every matchup. And so into Warrior, for example, that's like 15 damage that they can't prevent, because they trigger all the traps. Into Ira as well, it's 15 damage they can't prevent. So your base, sorry, it's 15 damage that they can prevent. So you're basically putting your opponent on like blitz levels of life by playing all these traps. And then when you mix that in with the fact that they disrupt at the same time, and you have access to this disruption through your attacks, it's a very deadly combination, and that's what makes the deck so effective. On to the second part of this video, which is the tournament report mixed in with various matchup advice. So my round 1 was against Ira. Ira is a super favored matchup for you because A, she triggers all your traps, and B, she does not really defend that well. She doesn't have a lot of armor, and she does play an okay amount of D-reacts, but again, you can interrupt that arsenal placement quite consistently. So you're dealing a crap ton of damage with your traps, and you're also dealing a crap ton of damage with the dominates. So yeah, you just outvalue her basically. And she can only really disrupt you with CNC, which isn't really that bad, because you have access to Long Draw and Perch Grapplers, which covers half a CNC on its own. So all in all, her threat density just doesn't get her there, her value doesn't get her there. It's a very favourable matchup. Then it was against my round 2 was versus Arachne, Slip Through the Cracks, took me a while to get that one. This is against my friend Finn, he got bodied. It was actually a very close game. I drew 2 non-arrow hands in a row in the middle game, and I fell really far behind, and so I realized that even when I started seeing my arrows again, I had to keep blocking because my only out was to find one of my blowout traps and pivot from there. Eventually that worked, and I was able to see that one through, so I was very happy with how I played that game because my deck failed me, or at least said, you know, you have to work for the win, and I felt like I did. My round 3 was against a Jarl. This was a draw in time. I was really far ahead. He was on like 20, I was on 25, he was on like 5 life, and the problem is we got to second cycle with like 10 minutes left, and this game ended in third cycle. So for the whole second cycle and third cycle, we were playing quite fast. So we both lost areas of value here and there, and he did catch up on the life lead because he pitch stacked some very nice, what's it called, Oakenol turns. And it gets to the end of the game, time is called. He swings at me for 6. Neither of us concede because I've got a dominate lined up, and he's nearly fatigued me, so like we both could have the win. I block out, send a dominate, but he's got Seeds of Tomorrow. I think that's what it's called. The one that is like Oasis Respite, but gets the card from your arsenal to the bottom of the deck to prevent 5. So it ends in a draw, super close game. Again, I think I could have got there if I'd had more time, because then I can think about a few plays. I definitely lost value on some things here and there. My round 4 was versus Vincent. Vincent's quite a tough matchup. I found that the best version of Riptide into Vincent, though, is Barbed Castaway, because Vincent is very good at blocking once she has her engine up. So aggro Riptide is just like, I don't know, it just doesn't do anything. She just blocks out, sends really good disruption at you. It's terrible. And my way to beat Vincent is to fatigue her of her engine. So once Malefic Incantation's gone, once Rune Blood Incantation's gone, once the Dirges are gone, once the Vexing Quillhand is gone, her turns are terrible. So you can kind of make her die to Blood Debt after that's gone. What happened in this game, though, is my opponent presented Carrion Husk and blocked with it quite early, and I just kind of blocked out as much as I could, and they were slowly taking like 2-3 Blood Debt every turn, and eventually got to a point where I was far ahead, but I drew 3 red buffs and Stone Rain with Tunic up, and I was like, oh my god, like, this does nothing. My opponent has like all his auras up, a few cards in the banish that he can use, and because I've been blocking quite a lot, and I've been blocking out quite well, he decides to take an off turn and just set up, and I'm just like, oh my god, thank god. And on his turn I send 13 Dominate, and it's got 2 Blood Rots on it, and he goes to like 3 life, and yeah, so it wins me the game on the spot, that one decision. So, and again, Tunic made all the difference there, because if I'd had Trench, I would have had to have paid to put the end counter on with one of my buffs, which wouldn't have got me there. So yeah, super close game, very hard matchup, but you just gotta be patient and see it through. And then round 5 was against Fang. Fang is a favourable matchup, but he also does a crap ton of damage. So you've got to be really careful how you block. If you don't have any traps in hand, you can't just be like, oh yeah, you know, I'll just take this damage, because all of a sudden you've taken like 14 damage, and you're like, oh crap. You know, he starts with a lot of armor as well. In this game, I did high roll though. I saw my boulder traps early, so I got rid of his armor quickly. And I also saw my dominates kind of naturally, one after the other with some buffs. So I think I finished that game on like 20 life. Then in top 8, I had the same Fang opponent, and he made me sweat. Like, it was a completely different game. I didn't see many traps early on at all, so I wasn't able to really kind of cover a lot of his damage. We were kind of chipping away evenly. I then get him down to like 3 life. He's got me on 2, and it's his turn with a full hand. And I'm drawing up my hand. I'm like, please, please, please traps, because again, I hadn't seen that many. And luckily, I had 3 traps in my hand, and that was enough to kill him. So very lucky, my opponent played it very, very well. He'd learned a lot from the first matchup and implemented a better game plan into me. I did kind of, I think, low roll in the first half of that game, but eventually got there. And then in top 4, I played against my friend Marco on Dash.io. He went on to win the entire event. If you want to see the deck tech, it is on the channel. It's the video just before this one. This was a close game for a while. I hit him with like a sleep dart for 14 or something. It just didn't do much. I did a lot of damage. My primary game plan into Dash.io is to go for fatigue, but he took a lot of damage early on, and so I was like, you know what, I can maybe just race him down now. But all of a sudden he did like a 30 damage turn out of nowhere, and then yeah, he had a deterministic kill with a maximum velocity, but he missed it, but he just killed me the next turn. I got him down to 1. If I'd seen one more trap in my hand, I win that game, and lo and behold, the next card on top of my deck was a Frailty trap. But it is what it is. I'm very happy with how the deck performed. I just wanted to see if the deck actually had legs in the CC format, because mid-range decks these days don't tend to have a good time of it, and this is as mid-range as it gets. Very fun back and forth games. So if that's your style, would highly recommend it. It is absolutely viable into the vast majority of the meta. If you run Feign Death, which I recommend you do, you become very good into Wizard as well, so your only really bad matchup is the Count Your Blessings stuff. But yeah, I think that's everything. If you've got any questions for me, let me know. More than happy to discuss Barbed, Castaway, Riptide. We'll see what the High Seas set brings for this deck as well, because it seems like this is what LSS wants to do with Riptide, is kind of focus on the aim stuff. And yeah, thank you for watching. Have a good day.